Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. Welcome to my second part on the social justice interpretation of Frank Herbert's Dune. But before we get back to that rather interesting article, there is one comment that was left on part 1 which I really want to reply to. It was such a well-written and so constructive that I feel I have to spotlight it at the start of this video and give it its proper place. It's by someone known as Unknown Sevenar. Yeah, it's I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that name. 7 isn't actually a letter, but anyway. Now, unfortunately for Unknown here, he seems to have a broken keyboard. It seems that his caps lock is permanently stuck down. I see this quite a bit on the internet. It's a fairly common problem, and the people with this problem always seem to be angry, which is totally understandable. When you have a broken keyboard, you know, it's perfectly reasonable that you'd be angry. So poor Unknown here clearly has a broken keyboard, but he still took the time to give me some very, very constructive criticism. So here we go. He says, "The fuck you getting comfortable using such derogatory terms for people of color, foo?" Foo? Is that what, kung fu? Sorry, I think he meant fool. Anyway, he goes on to say, "In your video title, in equivalence to your passive attack, stop being a coy pigskin, you ain't slick, you closet racist fuck." Well, there you go. Very constructive criticism. Now, I assume that Unknown is talking about my use of the term magical Negro, which just so happens to be a social justice term. And the term was popularized by black director Spike Lee. You know, the director who has directed such movies as Jungle Fever, Malcolm X, She's Gotta Have It, Do the Right Thing, and most recently, the Black KK Klansman.
Well, since you asked, I hate niggers. I hate Jews. Huh? Spics and mix. Dagos and chinks. But my mouth to God's ears, I really hate those nigger rats. And anyone else, really, that doesn't have pure white Aryan blood running through their veins. My sister, Pamela. She was just recently accosted by one of those black coons.
Is that so?
Yeah. Every time I think about that black baboon putting his filthy black hands on her purest white, driven snow body. I mean pure, Walter. She's a saint. She's an angel. It makes me want to puke.
You are just the kind of guy that we are looking for. Listen, when can you meet?
How about Friday night after I get off work?
Well, that's a deal, buddy boy. We'll get right back to you with the details. Take care now.
God bless white America.
Apparently he's a racist for using the term magical Negro. Who would have guessed? I mean, it's I'm surprised. I'm really surprised that Spike Lee is an anti-black racist. Probably a Trump voter too. Unless, of course, Unknown is suggesting that it's okay for black people to use this term, but not for white people, which, I don't know, that sounds pretty racist to me. I guess Wikipedia is also racist for having an article on it, but, you know. Now, I'm guessing Unknown didn't actually watch my video, surprise, surprise, and doesn't know the context of the title, and just saw the word Negro and automatically assumed it was anti-black. Well done, Unknown. A true intellectual giant, no doubt. But is the term Negro now offensive? Did I miss that social justice meeting? I mean, I try to miss the social justice meetings, but they're so in your face that they're hard to miss sometimes. But I didn't know the term Negro was now offensive, especially when it's used in context to a social justice term, one used by black directors. Very interesting. I guess we'll eventually get to the point where we don't have any language which we can use. It doesn't sound like it's too far off. I think George Orwell was wrong when he titled his book 1984. I think it probably should have been titled 2024, because that's where we're heading. Anyway, back to the Dune novel. Oh, one more thing before I get to the article. I will say that most of the comments in the comment section to part 1 were very interesting and constructive. Good to see that there are so many people out there who are fans of Frank Herbert and Dune. In fact, I think I will do a part 3 to this video in which I respond to those comments, as well as make some other observations about Dune. But back to the article, which I hope to finish off this episode. So let's continue with Dune's Paul Atreides is the ultimate mighty Whitey. Of course he is. So I think the part we were up to was, Dune is set in the far future, but Herbert wasn't coy about drawing parallels with earthbound colonial narratives. Paul is a noble duke from a planet with a temperate climate. Though it's the far future, he's associated with a European-style noble tradition. He's also the product of a centuries-long breeding experiment. So he's effectively a perfect eugenics specimen. Well, no, because it doesn't really go to plan as the Bene Gesserit planned. They were hoping to control him, but it kind of spirals out of control. And as I pointed out in the first episode in this series, his abilities are more of a curse than a blessing. It continues. He goes to Arrakis, a desert planet whose inhabitants, the Fremen, are persistently linked to Arabs. Their culture includes both the Hajj and the Jihad. Okay, so are the Fremen a metaphor for Arabs in the Middle East? Well, the simple answer is yes and no. Now, the spice on the desert planet of Arrakis is obviously a metaphor for oil in the Middle East. The book was written in the early 60s. So that part can't be in doubt, right? The author of this bullshit article even mentions that later on. But beyond that, it's a lot more complex, because Frank Herbert liked to mix and mingle different cultures. For example, the Fremen are the descendants of the Zen Sunni wanderers. Now, the Zen Sunni were a religious sect which combined Zen Buddhism with Sunni Islam. In fact, what's known as Second Islam in Dune. It's all rather complex, as you can imagine. But Second Islam was based on the coming of a second prophet or something like that. It doesn't go into a great amount of detail about Second Islam. And there's also a Third Islam which Zen Sunni broke away from. Like I said, it's all rather complex. So yes, it is true that the Fremen have some Islamic influence in their background and some of their terminology, but they also have some Zen Buddhism influence, as well as other influences. And this mixing of cultures goes right through the Dune series. For example, the title for the Supreme Emperor of the universe is Padishah Emperor, which is a Persian term for ruler or emperor. So does that mean that the entire empire is Persian? Well, no, according to this author, it's European in origin. So there's a lot of cherry-picking done by this author. Where certain terms support his racist narrative, then he puts them forward, but ignores all the ones which don't support it. What a surprise. Anyway, let's continue. The Fremen are portrayed with the familiar tropes of noble savages. They are fierce, proud, dangerous, loyal, and organised into tribes where male leadership is determined through trial by combat. Yeah, as you pointed out, they were based partly on Middle Eastern culture and Arabs. Like I said, it's a metaphor for oil in the Middle East. You can't argue that the Fremen are metaphors for Arabs and then in the next paragraph claim that this is part of the noble savage trope. But the reason why both the Fremen and the Arabs organised themselves in such a way is because of their environment. If you were living on a desert planet where you basically live in caves, rock structures, because you can't build anything on the surface of Dune because you'll be attacked by sandworms. Now this is a bit different if you go further north where the cities are, but where the Fremen live, in the vastness of the desert, the only places you can really live are the rocky outcroppings. And they can only hold so many Fremen at a time. It's effectively impossible for them to build big cities outside of the south. So it's perfectly reasonable that they would group in tribes. It goes on to say, as in many an earlier colonial fantasy, the Fremen first plan to kill Paul, but when they find out just how cool he is, they quickly make him their leader and worship him. Well, this is bullshit. They had no intentions of killing Paul. They were planning on taking him, but not his mother. But she quickly showed that she was an asset to them, and they changed their minds.
I didn't hear them.
Perhaps these are the ones the Shadat Mapes told us of.
I will take the boy man. He shall have sanctuary in my tribe.
Get back! She has the weirding way.
Great gods. If you can do this to the strongest of us, you're worth 10 times your weight of water. As the leader of my people, I give you my bond. Teach us this weirding way, and you both shall have sanctuary. Your water shall mingle with our water.
Then I will teach you our way of battle.
There had to have been people for this many plants to survive.
Fremen.
We have to find them.
Most intruders here regret finding the Fremen. Don't run, intruders. There is no escape.
I know you. You're Stilgar. The Fremen who came to see my father with Duncan Idaho.
There was a sloppy crossing you made from the crash. You called a worm.
You were watching us? All of that time?
We didn't see you.
You weren't meant to.
We're wasting time here still. This is the boy Liet told us to seek.
How can you be sure? I say we take their water and move on.
Be quiet, Jameis.
As you can hear, I have a problem to solve. My people are cautious and pragmatic. Good qualities in the desert. Better sometimes to miss an opportunity than invite disaster. Your only value at the moment is the water in your flesh.
You know the law still.
Yes.
The law.
Tell them to stop hunting my son. Tell them.
Leave off! Leave the boy alone. Do you hear me?
Is this the way you welcome friends of Liet? Is it? Misessas Fregia. Andral Terepara.
As leader of this tribe, I'm offering the waiting woman and her son sanctuary.
No Fremen anywhere will lay hand on you while you have my protection.
For how long?
Don't be a fool, woman. You're fugitives from the Harkonnen. Don't be fugitives from us as well.
And once again, this is all about survival, right? They live in an extremely harsh environment, so they can't possibly take someone into their tribe who isn't going to be an asset, who's going to be a drain. They don't have a welfare system, all right? You either contribute to the tribe or you die, basically. And Paul did not quickly become their leader. It took years. That's a major part of the story. It like takes up 2/3 of the book. And of course, this author totally ignores the fact that Dune was a warning against following leaders like Paul. It wasn't praising him. It wasn't saying that, isn't Paul Atreides great? Everyone should follow a leader like that. No, it was a fucking warning. Now, not surprisingly, after I published part 1 in this series, I started getting recommendations for other videos on Dune by YouTube. And one of them is by a channel which has an excellent series on the history of science fiction. I highly recommend it. I'll put a link below to the channel. And they just recently put up part 3 of their series on Dune and Frank Herbert. Now, they mentioned that there are 3 types of leadership which Dune was warning against. I'm going to show you a small clip focusing on the 3rd type, which was focused on Paul Atreides. Once again, the link to the entire video will be down below. I highly recommend you go watch it if you're a Dune fan.
The 3rd warning in Dune is a warning against charismatic leadership. Herbert lived through the rise of fascism, saw the communist revolution deteriorate into Soviet dictatorship, and was working as a speechwriter in Washington during the height of the McCarthy era. He was even distantly related to McCarthy, but decried what he was doing to America. In all this, he saw a single problem at their root, a single issue plaguing the world, the problem of individuals coming to dominate the political world through charisma rather than ideas. He saw the problem of persuasion by force of personality, where people would go along with dangerous, even catastrophic ideas if they were offered by people with enough charisma. He saw the cult-like mentality where regular people would sell out those they'd been close to, or even do things clearly self-destructive for the sake of an ideology espoused by people with enough presence. So he wove his thoughts on this idea into Dune. And in Dune, he offers us a number of different leaders, each of which represent a different form of the charismatic leadership style he had come to see as so harmful to humanity. Lastly, there's Muad'dib, Paul Atreides, the son of Leto, who will lead the Fremen on a jihad throughout the galaxy. He represents the charismatic religious or mystic figure. He plays on ancient hopes and traditions to rise to power, and once there, uses those same mystic traditions to create a fanatical, almost maniacal devotion to him. But the biggest lesson that Muad'dib presents to us is actually about what's out of his control. Those myths and legends, those old desires and ancient ideas of who the Fremen are, those end up ruling him. Even with his ability to see into the future, those things constrain him. He can't see a way out of the path that they shaped for him so long ago. In this way, he is a caution and a warning, telling us that the most core elements of how we make up who we are is not a path to power, but a trap. A trap that lets those things take on a life of their own and play out their terrible purpose.
Now, the very notion that the Dune series of books somehow puts Paul on a pedestal above the rest of humanity because he's white, and it's just crazy, right? If you've read the books, you know that this is not the case. And like you just saw in the clip, it's actually a warning against following people like Paul, and it's also a warning about the trap that Paul falls into. And in the 2nd book, which I'm assuming the author probably has never even heard of, let alone read, before writing this bullshit article about Dune, in the 2nd book, Paul Atreides actually compares himself to Hitler. Now, not in a white supremacist type way, which I'm sure the author of this article would assume, but Paul compares himself to Hitler because what Paul has done is so far worse than Hitler. Mind you, Paul has tried to stop this from happening, but it's just got out of his hands, right? It's gone out of control. The Fremen priesthood has taken over, and they're now doing this in his name, and he can't stop it. But the 2nd book, Dune Messiah says, "He killed more than 6 million." That's referring to Hitler. "Pretty good for those days. As a conservative estimate, I've killed 61 billion, sterilized 90 planets, completely demoralized 500 others. I've wiped out the followers of 40 religions." So that's not praise, right? To think that the book is somehow praising Paul is ludicrous. As I said in the previous video, Frank Herbert is not kind to his characters. He is not kind to Paul Atreides. Yes, he does become Emperor of the Universe, but at a great cost. It costs him everything. And he loses everything as well. It's not a happy ever after story. And to somehow think it is fucking ludicrous. But let's go back to the bullshit article. It continues, "This isn't a one-time thing for the Fremen either. Before Paul, their previous leader/god figure, was an off-world ecologist named Liet, who, in Herbert's words, had gone native." So Liet Kynes was a planetologist for the Emperor of the Universe, and he was secretly working to help the Fremen. And he had the knowledge and ability to set in motion plans to terraform the planet. And the Fremen were secretly growing plants and hoarding water in an attempt, in the long term, to terraform the planet Arrakis into a lush green, more pleasant world to live on. And this goes back to the origins of the book Dune. What inspired Frank Herbert in the first place is when he saw some sand dunes being reclaimed. Someone from some environmental organisation or something had been planting in the sand dunes to stop them from blowing away. They were reclaiming the area. And this inspired Frank to come up with the idea of a desert planet which would eventually be transformed and terraformed, which it is over the series of books. The Dune in the fourth book is totally different. It has rivers and oceans, and it's no longer a desert planet. It took thousands of years, though. But yeah, that was the inspiration for the book, and Liet Kynes, being an off-world planetologist, had that knowledge. Now, the Fremen, having little resources and struggling to survive day to day, didn't really have the same opportunities to go to the galactic universities that Liet Kynes did. They couldn't just send someone off to become an ecologist, right? So they had to rely on someone else. Now, I find it weird that the author of this article would be condemning this, because charity organisations go to third world countries all the time and help. Doctors go to third world countries to help the native people. That's not because they consider themselves to be superior because they're white. Obviously not all the doctors are white, but that's beside the point. And they're not going there to help the helpless, primitive natives or whatever bullshit this article is putting forward. No, they're in a position of privilege, and they're helping those without that same privilege, that same opportunity to learn to become a doctor, not to mention have access to, Western medicine and things like that. So I assume the author of this article thinks all that's okay, but Liet Kynes going to the planet Dune and trying to help the native Fremen is apparently racist or something. And come to think of it, Paul and his mother are refugees. They're refugees taken in by the Fremen. I would assume that the author of this article isn't against refugees, right? If someone's fleeing from Mexico to America, I would assume, I could be wrong, but I would assume that the author of this article would be supportive of them getting American citizenship and being helped because, they're in a situation where they need it, right? But not in the case of Paul and his mother, who have lost everything. The Fremen should have just left them in the desert to die, right? Yeah, okay. Let's continue. The mighty Whitey trope suggests that a white person dumped among less white people will automatically become a king and a god. Well, Liet Kynes was not a king nor a god, and to my memory, the book doesn't describe him as being white either. Now, I could be wrong. There could be a passage somewhere in there which I've forgotten, but I don't remember Liet Kynes being described as white. And like I said in my last video, our notion of race would be completely different 20,000 years in the future when the human population is spread over thousands of planets. Now, Paul is worshipped as a god, but like I've just previously discussed, that is a warning not to do that. It's not saying that it's a good thing because he's white and white should be superior. No, it's saying that we should not worship people as gods, and that when we do, things can get out of control. But the author doesn't understand this. The author of this article is clueless, apparently. Let's continue. But in Dune, as in other Mighty Whitey stories, there's a bit more going on. Paul's whiteness makes him an object of worship for the Fremen. Yes, that's right. We know this, right? We know that the Fremen worship Paul because of his whiteness, because it's never mentioned in the book anywhere. At no point does any character say, gee, Paul must be a god because he's white. Doesn't happen anywhere. So it's strange that the author would come to that conclusion. And the Fremen came in contact with a lot of off-worlders, which we could assume were as white as Paul, if Paul is in fact white. They don't worship them. The Fremen don't worship off-worlders. In fact, they despise most of them. So that the fact that Paul becomes their god has nothing to do with his race. And in fact, it has everything to do with religious manipulation by the Bene Gesserit, a completely female organisation. The author doesn't mention them, though. I assume criticising the Bene Gesserit would be misogyny, right? Yeah. So, we can't put any blame on them. Next. But his time with them also gives him access to his full prophetic abilities, ultimately allowing him to defeat the Emperor and become the effective ruler of the universe. No, it's not his time with them, it's his access to the spice. It's the spice which ultimately triggers his powers. To be more exact, it's a concentration of the spice. He goes through the ritual which the Bene Gesserit usually go through when they become a Reverend Mother. Now this normally kills males, but because Paul is the Kwisatz Haderach, it allows him to access his full abilities. But this would have happened if he had have remained on Caladan and had have drank the same concoction there. The result would have been the same. Although, to be honest, he wouldn't have been constantly eating and breathing the spice as he was on Arrakis. But the point's the same. It's not the Fremen which somehow magically triggers his abilities. It's the spice. Similarly, Tarzan is tougher and stronger than other European whites, and Iron Fist has powers denied to most white people. Okay, let's start with Tarzan. Is Tarzan stronger than other European whites? Yes, because he is an athlete. Okay? That's like saying someone in the Olympics is stronger or faster or whatever, fitter, right, than your normal person. Well, yeah, obviously, because that's what they train for. Just like Tarzan is stronger because he's doing physical activity all fucking day. Okay, he's not some guy sitting in front of a TV eating Kentucky Fried Chicken. Right? So, of course he's going to be stronger. As for Iron Fist, he has powers denied to most white people. Well, technically, he has powers denied to all white people, because from memory, he's the first white person to wield the Iron Fist. Now, he's not the first person to use the power. It's passed on from person to person. When an Iron Fist dies, another one gets it. And there's been a long line of Iron Fists before him. From memory, all of them were Asian. So they don't give him this power because he's white. And the reason why he has this special power that other Europeans don't have is because he earned it. And only one person can wield it at a time as well. So obviously he's the only one with it, right? Let's go on. Whitey is mighty not just in contrast to people of colour, but because of his affinity for people of colour. No. That's not the case in the examples you gave, but let's continue. This makes sense if you see Mighty Whitey's might as a metaphor for imperialism. White people grow wealthy and powerful by subjugating other people and extracting their resources. Yeah, you mean like China is doing to Africa at the moment, right? Those Mighty Whitey Chinese going to Africa and extracting their resources. Yeah, that is clearly a case of white supremacy. It's not that, some people with power take advantage of those without power regardless of race. No, of course not. It's white supremacy, obviously. Those damn Aryan Chinese, curse them. Curse them for their blue eyes and blonde hair. But need I point out that the Empire in Dune are not the good guys. It's the Fremen which are the good guys. And once again, this is a metaphor for the rest of the world going to the Middle East for its oil. Let's continue. In Dune, the Arrakis desert contains a loose oil analogue called spice. Yeah, there's nothing loose about it. It's clearly a metaphor. Spice powers spaceships rather than cars or factories. Yeah, it doesn't technically power spaceships. It does allow them to travel, but if I'm going to be pedantic, it doesn't actually power them. It powers the navigators. The spaceships could still travel without navigators, but it's a lot more dangerous. The spice is a drug which sparks telepathic and precognitive abilities, and pilots must take it to steer from planet to planet. Now, this is true, but the interesting thing is that early on in this article it listed a long list of abilities that Paul has that makes him so powerful. But what the author of this article forgot to mention is that there are numerous people in the Dune universe who also have these abilities. Now, it is true that the Kwisatz Haderach is quite rare, but precognitive abilities are not. It's just that Paul's are supercharged because he is the Kwisatz Haderach. Let's continue. The Fremen have been made into super fighters by the harsh conditions of Arrakis. Now, this is true, but it's also true of the Sardaukar, which are the Emperor's soldiers. Now, they come from a prison planet, so they've suffered generation after generation of harsh conditions on a prison planet, and that's made them a lot stronger and hardier. They come from Seleucia Secundus, which was originally the capital of the Empire, but was destroyed in a nuclear war centuries ago, thousands of years ago. Let's continue. Paul takes the spice to become a prophet and capitalizes on the misery of the Fremen when they become his warriors and sweep away all before him. Okay, as I've pointed out numerous times in this video and the previous one, this is a warning against that. Paul is not some hero without consequences. He is pulled apart by Frank Herbert. He loses everything. He's trapped by his prophecies. He's riddled with guilt because of what happens, and the whole thing gets out of his control. And I don't know about capitalizing on the misery of the Fremen. They willingly followed him. They weren't tricked into it. Well, they were kind of tricked into it by the prophecies planted by the Bene Gesserit. But it also benefited them. They wanted to take control of Arrakis and terraform it. And that's exactly what happened. Over centuries, or over thousands of years. And the end result by Book 4 is we have, if I remember correctly, what is referred to as museum Fremen. Because they are no longer in this harsh environment, they've lost their strength and what made them Fremen in the first place. Anyway, let's continue. Paul's divinity and power comes from his ability to capitalize on the resources and pain of others. On the surface, mighty Whitey characters are superior because of their whiteness. No. At no point is Paul considered superior because of his supposed whiteness. But dig a little deeper, and their powers are borrowed, or more accurately, stolen. Well, no, Paul doesn't steal his powers. As this very article points out earlier on, he's the result of thousands of years of breeding. He didn't steal a magical amulet or something from the poor native Fremen. No, if he had have remained on Caladan, he would have, been exactly the same. As long as he had that spice to trigger him. He didn't steal anything from the Fremen. Next. They are godlike because they appropriate the labour and wealth of others. Well, you could say that of any leader, though, couldn't you? And once again, let me point out that the Fremen followed Paul willingly, and eventually it got out of control. He lost control, the priesthood took over, and the whole thing was acting in his name. He had no power over it. Next. Paul claims to be racked with guilt because he sees a future in which he leads the Fremen in a path of bloody destruction across the universe. Yeah, as I pointed out earlier, he is racked with guilt. He considers himself worse than Hitler. Which, I think anyone would if they're responsible or see themselves responsible for 61 billion deaths. But apparently this is just a claim by Paul. He doesn't really feel any guilt at all, right? Next. But really the guilt is for his present glory, built on blood and a deceit that the story won't and can't quite acknowledge. Bullshit. My advice to Noah, the author of this article, would be maybe read the books before writing an article about them. I know that's a crazy idea. I know that journalists reviewing things these days tend not to watch them or to read them before writing a review. They just pass judgment based on their biased stereotypes of what it probably is about. I guess that's a lot easier than actually doing work. But my advice would be to actually read the books and to actually see what they're saying. I know that's crazy. Now, there is a little bit more to this article. Noah goes on to talk about a book called Empire of Sand, which I've never read before, so I'm just going to skip that. And I think you've probably had enough of Noah's disrespect for the amazing work of Frank Herbert. I know I have. So, I'm subscribed to a YouTube channel called Top Tens, and it's not a bad channel. They basically put out a video, I think, every day, and it's they do a list of the top 10 whatever. And sometimes the topics are really interesting, other times they're not. I just don't bother watching them. Occasionally they can get a little bit social justicey, but it really depends on the topic. And they sometimes make mistakes. Sometimes they make some very bad mistakes. I remember seeing an episode, I can't remember exactly what it was called. It was something like top 10 examples of great women in war or something like that. And the host talked about how a group of women during the Civil War captured a cannon and turned it around to fire at the enemy soldiers. Or something like that. I can't remember the exact details. Now, you may be asking, why do I have a problem with that? Well, the reason is, I think it was 3 or 4 days earlier, they'd done a top 10 on commonly believed myths, or something like that. It might have been myths about the Civil War, or, once again, I can't remember the exact name of the episode. But they mentioned that exact same story, only in that instance they referred to it as a myth, which didn't happen, and there's absolutely no proof that it ever happened. So, which one is it? Is it a myth, or is it an example of how great women are during war? Who knows? Now, I'm guessing this mistake happened because they must have more than one writer or researcher. So things like that are going to happen all the time, unless you're really, really careful. But, you know, they're human, so putting out a video a day, there's bound to be mistakes. But the ones you're about to see, oh boy, I don't think they get anything right, except the name of the movie. They actually do get the name of Dune right, but I think just about everything else they got absolutely wrong, and the level that they fuck up here it's truly unbelievable. So I thought I'd put this at the end of the video and just pick it apart for your enjoyment.
Number 1. Dune. This 1984 film is notorious for a contentious production and for its director David Lynch disowning it. With such popular source material and such striking production design, it couldn't help but attract a substantial cult following anyway. It probably didn't hurt that Frank Herbert had some nice words to say about how it was a visual feast either. Paul Atreides, the hero of the story, is
Paul Atreides. Not Paul Atreides, but Paul Atreides. Now, look, I don't want to be too precious and pick on the fact that he's mispronounced the name of the main character. These mistakes happen. Obviously, he hasn't seen the movie or read the book, and he's just the host, and he's just reading, you know, a script which someone else has written. And, you know, I'm human. I mispronounce things all the fucking time. Probably at least once a video. There's probably me mispronouncing things in this video. So I don't want to be too critical of this first mistake, and if that was the only one they made, I wouldn't be criticizing their video. But that's the minor one. It gets worse from here.
He's driven from his home with only his mother Julia at his side into the...
His mother Julia, not his mother Jessica, not the lady Jessica. Yeah, okay, next.
Horrible deserts of the Arrakis when the Harkonnen effectively conquer the planet. There, he trains and equips the Freemen, a race of extremely hard-scrabble desert people with laser guns. These laser guns are powered by the human voice. They're instrumental in the final battle when House Atreides reconquers the planet. The problem is, where did Paul get these guns? He and his mother certainly weren't carrying them or the raw materials to make them during their hasty escape. No one tells Paul how to build one, so even if the Fremen had the resources to make one, he should have no better idea than them.
Wow, that is a massive plot hole. That is a huge, huge plot hole that I'd never noticed before. Geez, I don't know how to answer that. That is clearly a massive mistake. I mean, David Lynch, when he was making the movie, he could have just put in a scene where, you know, Paul and his mother, Jessica, I mean his mother Julia, found the plans because Dr. Huey had left them for them, right, along with his father's signet ring, the Duke's signet ring. So that would have been a very, very simple scene to put in the movie, which really would have filled that plot hole.
Huey's left the plan for the weirding modules.
Oh, that scene was actually in the movie. Oh, well, that's really embarrassing, isn't it?
It might as well be Lynch just telling the audience, if you don't get this, the problem isn't on your end. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below. Also subscribe, brand new videos every day of the week. Leave us something else to watch right now. Check out some videos linked to on the screen.